we've had schools visit here and see that our classrooms are uncluttered, very little on the walls. Some 6th grade teachers came and visited, spent a couple of days with us. And then when we went back to their classrooms the next time, they had totally, like the whole school was still kind of a cluttered mess, but their classrooms were totally simple. And they said it made all the difference in the world.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with our Core 4, Martin, Tanya, and Paul. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all back.
You get so serious. So, that's just, we're in hysteria. And then you just pull it right
turn
back.
It. Yeah. I had a lot of practice with you. Gotta zip it up real fast. Oh, well, it's good to have everybody back. And before I forget, we have something a little new. We have an email address, podcast@memoriapress.com. And that is a place where we would like to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, your suggestions. If you'd like the link to Paul's tie so that you can match him when you're watching or listening to our episodes, we would like to hear from you. So please talk to us, ask us questions, podcast@memoriapress.com. While that was on my mind, I wanted to get it out there because I've forgotten.
That's good.
What are we reading? I feel like it's the time of year when, it's darker earlier and later, and there's just more hours in the day to kind of hunker down. Martin?
The strange thing is we talk about this every show, and I'm never prepared for an answer. I don't know what it is. And I'm reading, and this is for one of our memoriacollege.org classes, and on modernity with Jan Bentz. And we're reading Charles Taylor's A Secular Age.
Oh.
And, there's all of this, I don't know what kind of literature you call this, but it's about why we think the way we do now, right? What is different between modern thinking and medieval thinking, and I love that. I've read a lot of books on that topic, if you can call it a topic. It's really a whole genre, really, of literature. And one of the great books on that is A Secular Age by Charles Taylor. And so that's one of the parts of the readings for that class. And I'm taking the class myself because it's just a topic I'm interested in. So I'm very much enjoying that. And we're reading, other writers, and there are many who've written about these things, and what is the decline in the belief in God done to the way we think about the world, and so on. So I find all those fascinating.
And you're enjoying it?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And what's the class?
The class, modernity. I'm not sure I remember the whole name of the class. There's a subtitle that I'm not.
The Genesis of Modernity.
The Genesis of Modernity. There.
At memoriacollege.org.
.org.
I looked at you to help him.
Yes.
Did you?
Yes. Well, and this is a 5-week course, and you're already 2 or 3 weeks in. Yes. So
I'm sure it'll be repeated though.
But like in a couple of years.
Yeah.
But you can go on memoriacollege.org and look at the spring classes that there's. We actually have had a couple of Memoria students reach out and say our problem with the spring classes this term is that they're all so good.
Choosing
and we're
one.
having trouble choosing one to take, because we really don't recommend you do more than one core class, maybe a seminar at the same time, but 2 core classes is too hard to withstand, really.
Is that the reading load, the writing load, all of it?
Probably most of the reading load, but also the writing load. It's a lot. They're demanding classes. You will learn a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but we don't want you overwhelmed.
They are. As somebody who's, I'm provost, and yet when I delve into to take a class or to take just maybe one unit of the class, because I can do that, this is hard. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think this is a problem for a lot of us. We think, well, I really want to read that someday. Mm. These classes, what these classes do is they give you an excuse to do it.
Yeah.
People need excuses to do things in this mad world. So I think that's one of the great benefits of these classes is whether they're if you're enrolled and you take the core classes, which are more strictly what we call the great books, or some of these seminar classes, which are just about some book that hasn't made the lists yet, maybe, or some topic where there's a lot of literature in there that would be considered great by a lot of people, but it's not on the formal list. It just gives you the excuse to sit down and get your coffee out and get this stuff read and marked up and write about it a little bit, because that's what writing about it is really where the rubber meets the road. It's where you have to collect your thoughts about what you've written and put them on paper, which is hard for a lot of people to do. But even when it is hard for you to do, after you've done it, you realize what a benefit this was for you, because the writing of it,
But it's also not a solitary endeavor, because they've discussed that stuff in class.
Exactly,
Right.
The classes are small in order for every individual to be able to participate and kind of work their thoughts out orally, and then you leave that and start writing.
How about you, Tanya?
I am 500 pages in on Barnaby Rudge and trucking through. I've got 200 pages to go.
Is it going to be
Believe it
the
or not.
best 200 pages, you think?
I don't know. I mean, there are parts of it that I think, this is just brilliant Dickens, but it just really, I think, could be a couple hundred pages less than it is.
Isn't that every Dickens story?
No, it is not. I thoroughly enjoy most Dickens stories, but this one to me did take a long time to get to the actual center of. It's about a historical plot, or not. I guess it's a plot where there was an uprising. It's in 1777 to 80, early 80s. And there was an uprising of Protestants burning down Catholic churches. I'd never heard of this uprising before. It was just like apprentices and just common people who decided that they were going to take a stand against Catholicism. And so, but it took so I knew that going in, and the main character, Barnaby Rudge, is what you would call today would be a special needs young adult. And so I'm interested because the whole book is named after him. So I'm interested in what happens to his character and just the thought of why. And I just recently read The Door in the Wall because we're working on that study guide.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm back
a
in
new edition?
medieval time. Yes, you know how we've just released Farmer Boy second edition. Just going, they aren't drastically different, but we've just included these essential questions so that to help students start looking at books from the top down and seeing what are the major themes and then how they're going to connect throughout their curriculum. So we've got Charlotte's Web, I think, is very close to going to the printer. Third grade's going to be done shortly. Now we're on the medieval year, but we've still got all the fourth grade ones are in the hopper that are in editing in some stage or another. After we redo them, then they still need so much work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Always something that we're working on.
Always something, but they're starting to trickle in.
Paul?
So, after reading The Turn of the Screw and our discussion of it, Tanya made a comment that because I liked Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, of course I would like The Turn of the Screw. And so it got me thinking last night, I should go read another Daphne du Maurier book.
Which one?
I just found The King's General.
Oh, okay.
And it's set in English Civil War times.
That sounds different.
Yeah, but it's the same narrator in the audio version.
Gosh.
And so I feel like I'm right back in Rebecca. It's wonderful.
It's for me, they're just so overly dramatic. The characters are just screechy to me in those books.
Even Rebecca? You didn't like Rebecca?
I did not like Rebecca
Really?
at all.
Isn't she the one who wrote The Birds that Hitchcock.
I think
made
she
into a
did
movie.
write the
Oh,
bird.
did she? I didn't
I
know
think
that.
she
Oh,
did
yeah.
because
That
I
he
think I
based
saw
his
that on
movie
the
off
list
of?
I was looking at.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to go
yeah.
read that
They're
too.
creepy.
You know, just
Oh, I thought Rebecca was the most horrifying book that I've ever read, and yet there was nothing. If you said what was in it, there was nothing horrifying in it.
was horrifying in a good way,
Well,
like an enjoyable.
okay, I'm just
horrifying?
talking about the scene where she walks down
And
the
the
staircase in the wrong dress, and you almost fall apart as the reader. It is such a terrifying thing, and yet nothing really happens.
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean,
That takes a masterful literary craftsperson.
I think
to
it's
do
a
that.
wholly psychological thing.
Yeah,
It
right? Yeah,
is.
very
It
psychological.
is.
And Dan Scheffler's comment about
the turn of the screw.
the turn of the screw with Henry James and like his sort of foray into how do we perceive things, right? And as a reader, are we supposed to be really believing this is happening? The sort of the psychosis of the narrator is the one that's amping stuff up. I think you're right that du Maurier does that like in spades.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And you know, Jane Eyre has a
enjoy it.
little bit of that in it.
Yes.
With the crazy
I
wife
think there
in
are
the
so many
attic.
similarities to Rebecca and Jane Eyre.
I do too, but I like Jane Eyre a lot better.
Well, Jane is a beautiful character.
Right. Yes.
But
She really is.
there are so many similarities
She
to
is, to me, the ideal character who gave up so much
that.
just for her sense of inner morality.
Mhm. Jane.
No, I loved Maurier.
Of course you did.
I do. No,
I'm surrounded by men who love an overabundance of female drama. Because that's what it is.
An accusation that Martin's going to have to.
I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, we're gonna
I
let
mean,
that
do you
comment
watch-
die.
We cannot go there, Paul.
No.
Do you watch soap operas?
Yeah. You know,
You've been known to
my wife
dabble?
will make these remarks. She'll say, "Well, that was such a soap opera."
Mm.
What does that mean? It was a good drama. Why do you call it a soap
Is
opera?
there no
what is
distinction
it
between
that
drama
distinguishes a
and
soap opera from a good drama?
Just a lot of drama, a lot of
Maybe
emotion,
Needless
passion.
emotion.
right?
Yeah, I think
Needless
there's-
conflict.
Needless. I do think
Needless
There's the
conflict.
words
it
to
feels
that, yeah.
needless to me, or it feels
well. I mean, sure. Then a bad soap
like
opera.
wearing your heart on your sleeve in an overabundance.
Or you know how in old like 80s and 90s soap operas, if you watched it for 20 years, one of the characters, maybe some of them have died and come back to life 2 or 3 times. Just this needless
Yes,
Okay,
drama.
that's right.
all right. That's fine. But du Maurier definitely would not be that way. There's the subtlety. It was the subtlety in there that's the powerful thing.
Oh, that was a joke. I would definitely place du Maurier above a soap opera.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad we've established that.
It's not that I don't think she was an excellent writer. I just don't like that genre, and I don't like that
yeah.
all the screeching over excitement.
Like I don't like the boring, long, drawn out Dickens novels.
Ugh, I just can't.
They're
believe
both
you even
loud in
said
their
that.
own way.
Mhm.
I think we need some response here on our new email about that comment.
About the Dickens comment or about
Yes, about
There's
the
two
Dickens.
Oh, yeah,
Dickens
yeah.
books which we've established on this podcast are different than the rest, and those are the 2
Yes.
Dickens books I like.
Which is interesting.
Tale of Two Cities
Yes,
and
you're
Christmas
right.
Carol.
You're
Those
right.
are great
They are,
books. I love
yes,
them.
and they are
our listeners
totally
need to know
different.
that they have my permission to pile on
Every
all about
other
this.
Dickens book I have tried to read has been a slog.
You don't apparently have the imagination for it because his characters
We've
alone are
established.
just-
I do not think in pictures.
Oh,
I
that's
don't read in
right.
pictures.
Maybe
so if
that
that's what I
has-
need,
and he's
for
here
Dickens,
to talk about beauty.
Maybe that's why you need the over dramatization of a Gothic novel because
Ah.
it takes it so far for me, but for you, it's just like okay,
Yeah.
I'm finally
You're
there.
you're starting so desensitized that you
Thanks,
need
Jess.
the escalation.
maybe that's what it is.
Wow. Getting into the psyche of Paul.
That is an interesting concept, though.
Could be. Well, I think there might be more disagreeing and good conversation where this comes from with today's topic. Today, we're going to talk about beauty and its place in education and I think its place in the world. So, this first question might be the first and the last one I ask because it could carry us all the way through. And I want all of you to try to answer. How are we defining beauty?
For me personally,
Mm-hmm.
I like to start with creation and the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I'm not a trained, but I think even those things that we think are nasty in the natural world, really, if you really stop and look at them like a spider, which we don't really want to look at, they are beautiful. Why are they beautiful? Because they are so perfectly made. And there are ugly animals. But even if you
would you
watch
care to
them,
give an example?
well, like I don't think a manatee's all that
the chicken
beautiful.
on Paul's
That's
tie.
not real. That's not real.
I think chickens are cute, but I do think I've seen animals that aren't beautiful, but it feels like they're beautifully made.
So are
Like,
you
I don't
saying
think the
there's
manatee, I don't think the warthog is beautiful, but I think if you really watch them, you've got some kind of appreciation. I don't know. I can't.
Are
Maybe
you
we'll clear
conflating
this up.
beauty and wonder?
Maybe. I do think that
Great question,
there is
Jess.
wonder in beauty. There always should be wonder in beauty.
Mm-hmm.
But when I go to an art museum, I'm just assuming that everything in there is there for a reason. But it doesn't all affect me. So I don't know, I don't know how to tell what is beautiful from a learned art perspective. Like I feel like other people can. But we were in Edinburgh, my husband and I, sometime recently. And we went to this little church that was really hard to find. And it was just a little dark church, like so many over there. And it was old and the furniture was old, but there was this painting that somebody had done that nobody's ever heard of. And it was up behind the altar in a little chapel. And it was 4 panels. And all it was white. It looked like, to me, it was just literally white. And to me, it looked like it could have been a shroud or the robe of Jesus or something. I mean, it wasn't a person. It was literally just 4 panels of beautiful white flowing material.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, was that really a great work of art? I don't know. But to me, it was beautiful and I could not stop looking at it and I can't stop thinking about it. So I don't know.
Well,
Why are you looking at me like that?
well, I don't know how I'm looking at you.
Well, I can't believe she just said that.
No, it's just that unfortunately, it seems like sometimes museums are the last place to go when you want to see beauty, because in modern art, contemporary art, it often is not about beauty at all. It's about outrage, or it's about shocking you, or it's political, or the banana taped to the wall with duct tape.
Oh yeah,
and you don't mean
why is that in the museum?
And you're not. There's the difference between contemporary art and like abstract.
Yes,
But
abstract is
I also think a second point about museums, though, is like, at least in their intent, by definition, a museum is supposed to be where we have all of the beautiful and important things, right? And I think one of the things that it does is it saturates you. And whereas these beautiful works of art were intended to be in a home or in a church or something where it's not the focal point, it is something that might arrest your attention, like it did in the church for you, Tanya. But I think it's actually very hard in a museum to get swept away like that, because it's
been ripped out of its context.
It's one beautiful work after another, after another, after another, and I agree with you, Martin. We've come to the absurd in what we put in those museums But
Just skip the modern area of the museum. Just don't.
But
It's not.
I've been to many museums, and I think it has happened to me once in my life that I saw a painting and I just had to stop and stare at it for probably well over 30 minutes. And it was a small painting, but it just stopped me and I've never been able to find it again.
Oh.
And I've looked and I cannot find it, but it just, in that moment, I felt saturated by everything else and that one just stopped me.
Well, there was on Twitter yesterday, for some reason, I get this thing it's called Great Country Homes was the account. And it features this country gentleman in England, and he's going around talking about this new account and what it's going to do and what it's going to present to you. And talking about these English country houses. And as he's talking, he's walking through one of these great English country homes. And it's beautiful. The molding, the paintings, the dog is even beautiful, the furniture. And I thought about that when you're saying this, or when we're talking about the place for the art, that everything in that home is in its proper place.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's part of what makes each thing beautiful. Because part of beauty in a larger context is not like one painting. Is that painting beautiful? But to look around a room and see the paintings and the furniture and the
all
rugs
of it together
and the fireplace.
There's a harmony.
There's a harmony, which is one of
a defining
characteristics of beauty. There's a kind of harmony in it. So, in a sense, one mere object is not beautiful in the larger sense. It has to be in harmony with other things to, show its to its fullest extent its beauty
and decontextualize its of lesser.
And so I think that's kind of what Paul was talking about. It's kind of the museums are necessarily decontextual, have pieces that are necessarily decontextualized. And I think that's an important thing. Is hard to behold just one object outside of everything else and say, is that beautiful? It's almost the wrong question.
Well, and just you asked for a definition of beauty, which
none of us has
nobody's
given.
attempted yet so far. But
that's because Tanya was talking too much.
I would state
I was talking about beauty.
That beauty is one of the three transcendentals, right? Truth, beauty, and goodness. And as such, like what a transcendental is in philosophy is by the very fact that it is, that it exists, means that it has some, if I'm going to be a Platonist, some participation in an aspect of truth, goodness, and beauty. And so even, and this goes to Tanya's initial point, even the most revolting thing will have some hint of beauty to it by the very fact that it exists.
Well, it sounds a bit crazy. I'm just thinking about all the crazy people who have done so much damage in the world who are God created. But the damage that has come out of that creation is not beautiful.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But you're saying everything God created is beautiful, but then what you do with it is you're on your own.
Well,
could be beautiful, maybe not.
If we have free agency, if we have the ability to choose, right? So the fact that we exist means God has given us, right, existence, holds us in existence. The moment he stops to think about us, the moment we cease to exist, right?
This brings me right back to East of Eden and Kathy.
Oh.
I mean, yes. I just... Yeah.
Well, this is why I like Augustine's metaphor of light and darkness, because he's trying to explain evil. And he uses the imagery of light and darkness as the good being light and the bad being darkness. What is darkness? It is the lack of light. Right? And so when we're talking about the transcendentals, beauty being one of them, these are the aspects of light, of being, right?
Of
being,
existence,
which
yeah.
is that's, and the easiest way for me to think about it is as light, and that ugliness is a lack of beauty.
And
That badness is a lack of goodness. That truth is a a lack of falsity. That doesn't sound right.
No. Falsity is a lack of truth.
Right.
Right. And ugliness is a lack of beauty. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when you get into areas that are so utterly abstract, if you don't have a good metaphor to deal with it, it's very hard to think about. You need a picture. You need a metaphor.
Which is why what's so interesting about that is it makes so many parts of Scripture make sense, because if God doesn't relate to us analogically, could we even understand so many of the points of the higher spiritual points of our faith if we're not related to an analogy? Because how could we understand?
Yes, and a lot of Scripture is poetry, and which is another thing too, is that it's easier to see what when you're discussing something like beauty. It's easier to see it if it's described poetically than if it's described discursively and philosophically. And I think that one transcendental is unique in that aspect. I mean, you could see truth in poetry too. You can see goodness in poetry, but it's almost required when it comes to beauty,
because it's almost less concrete.
Yeah, well. No, and because it's so concrete.
But is it subjective? I might think a poem is beautiful and you don't.
So how does that establish that it's subjective? Maybe
I'm
right
asking
and you're wrong.
you if it's subjective.
No, it doesn't mean it's subjective. That does not follow. It just means it could mean that one of us is right and one of us is wrong.
Yes, and in your eyes, I'm the wrong one.
If we go,
but if it speaks to me in a way that it doesn't speak to you, that doesn't mean that I'm wrong.
No, not necessarily.
Right. Well, and that's where your example of looking at that whiteness, I'm like, that sounds absolutely boring to me.
I need to find it and see if I can find a picture of it.
It whereas I'm sure the painting I was looking at was some Greek deity with nymphs and whatever around, like.
The one that you have never found again?
The one I could never find.
And you don't even know the artist?
No. And I'm sure it was somebody I didn't recognize, some artist I didn't recognize. But I'm sure that would not have spoken to you as much, right? So there is something about it, to the point where we were talking before. I mean, Aquinas' definition is something about like that which is pleasing. Something about that. It's that which is pleasing.
Well, I wrote down a couple definitions. What pleases on being beheld is one definition. I jotted it down before. I don't even know where I got it from. Disinterested pleasure.
What does that mean?
Disinterested pleasure.
Give an example.
Oh, I don't. I'm just.
That's actually. Now that you say that, though, because that's coming from Kant.
Yeah.
Now that you say that, it's.
Oh, I wrote those down when you said it.
Yeah.
There's an element to in this. I think this moment of transcendence, if you want to say, it's like this moment where you are like this experience of where you're saying, I am beholding something that I can't turn away from because it is so attractive. There is nothing that I'm benefiting from that. So there's no other self-interest for me other than just the beholding of it, right? So one could argue, well, that's giving you something, but it's not a pleasure that
is useful. It's not the usefulness.
It's not useful. Yeah. That's, I think, what the disinterestedness.
There's not a necessity.
Well, there's not there's not practical. There may be no practical use for it. It's not in its practical aspect that is beautiful. It's in something that doesn't involve anything that helps in any other way other than it's just beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's not practical, but also Adler says that it's, and maybe this is Kant, that says that you don't even seek to know it, to own it. We seek only to know it. And this desire is a disinterested desire, and the pleasure, which comes from the satisfaction of it, can cause a disinterested pleasure. So I didn't think, well, I did though. I did think, standing in that little church in Scotland, I did think I would love to have this in my house because it was just so moving to me. But so I guess I wasn't disinterested because I thought I'd like to be able to look at it all the time.
Well, I don't. Yeah, but you're not.
But
You're not
I
really.
didn't.
It's not really a utilitarian way of looking at it.
It was for the beauty of it.
This idea of beauty, and this is just occurring to me now as we're talking about it, and because I think in even Aquinas' definition, he says that it's the beautiful is that which pleases us on being seen, right? And we really do depend on the faculty of sight when it comes to beauty. But we also talk about eternal beatitude as the beatific vision is a phrase that is used, right? So we're beholding, God Himself, and it's almost like when we're having these moments where we see something that is just utterly beautiful and makes us stop, is sort of this foretaste. Because I think there is something, as we're talking about, like untangible about this experience that...
Or intangible.
Or intangible, if you like to be grammatically correct. But all of those things fade away, Tanya, when you're beholding,
I feel like perfect grammar is beautiful.
Because it's orderly.
It's orderly
okay,
and structured.
But I was making a point about beholding God Himself.
Yes, and I think that's great. I mean, I do.
But it's
I really
only,
do. I
wouldn't
think
you say
we've
there's
got
an
to keep that on our
experiential
minds.
aspect to it, though? Like a meal, you might not have to see it for it to taste fantastic.
True.
Or swimming in the ocean.
But we don't.
Are those not
typically
beautiful?
Characterize a meal as beautiful. We say it's tasty, or we say it's wonderful. We don't really say it's beautiful. We say it's beautiful based on how it's presented before we start eating, right?
But what about swimming in the ocean?
Because
it's that experience.
Right.
Can beauty be more than just something that you see? It can, because it can be music.
That's true.
It's not just sight. It can be just looking at a group of children playing together.
You're looking.
Oh, okay, that's sight.
But I was going to say
Poetry,
You could go through the senses.
I was going to say, you smell your favorite meal.
Oh, yeah.
You smell a candle.
But
You
again,
smell
not
a Christmas tree.
And that
smelling. We never say it's beautiful. We say
what
You
a
might
beautiful
not.
smell.
What?
I would.
Well, we do
a beautiful smell.
Well,
yes.
we don't in common parlance, but I think we would have to admit, thinking about it a little bit, that it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just another sense you're using to apprehend.
But I guess my question would be, would it not be better to describe that as good?
Well, what I'm wondering is, do you think if somebody couldn't see that they wouldn't have any kind of beauty in their lives?
Well, you mentioned music. I think music is throwing me off kilter here.
Because imagine putting yourself in front of, I don't know, a world-renowned orchestra. You're in Vienna.
Yeah.
And you close your eyes. You might be in a grand cathedral or opera house, but you close your eyes and listen. You could be moved to tears and not even see the cello.
Sure. I don't deny that.
And that would
but
be
beauty
an
is not the
experience
only
of
thing
goodness
that
or beauty.
moves us to tears.
Right. But in my example,
but
would you be drawn to the beauty or what?
I think you would, yes. And music is an issue that I have. But I was really relying on Aquinas, who says it brings pleasure on being seen.
Well, I think that
maybe
and
he
this goes
doesn't
back
mean
to
I was just going to say, is seen...
Well, Aristotle
bigger idea.
considers sight the primary sense.
He does, and that's why
so
Thomas is doing
when
it.
he's saying he doesn't necessarily mean when he just uses that example that's the only example. I don't think I think you could apply this. Beauty can be beheld in something you see. It can be held in something you hear, and I think it could be it doesn't sound right to us but only because we never use it that way. I think you could say the same thing about smell, touch, all the five senses. That you're right. There are all ways of apprehending being, and the transcendentals are the three aspects of being.
Well, right, and you're right, Martin. That the distinction between truth, beauty, and goodness is not as clear as we try to parse it out to.
Because goodness can be beautiful.
Connected
Yeah,
in a
because
way
again,
that
goodness is beautiful.
By the nature of them existing, there has to be a share of all of these things, right? So beauty and goodness are always going to be hand in hand, right? As well as truth.
Well, there are three refractions of God in the sense that God is being itself, right? Yeah. I mean, I read an article one time, and the title was it logic is human, and beauty is, and literature is angelic. I was just using literature as an example, or the stand-in for beauty. That there's something angelic about that, and the reason I said that was because if you look at the writing, the philosophical writing on angels, okay. And there's a dispute that Aquinas addresses in, I think it's in the Summa Theologica, where he's talking about the question being, are angels rational? And he says, no, angels are not rational. And a lot of people have a problem with that, right? But he says, angels' rationality is a characteristic of human beings because when we reason, we go through steps towards the truth, right? Whereas, as he says, angels perceive truth directly because they are purely simple beings. We're a complex being, right? But angels have no complexity at all. They're just purely simple creatures. They're just a form. And
I mean, that's just speculation.
No, well,
you don't know anything about angels.
Well, have you read his argument? You can't just say that. There's an argument for that,
where's
and he presents it in
Where's
in
that
the
coming
it's in the
from?
Summa
That
Theologica.
expertise on angels.
A lot of thought,
and
by
probably
theologians.
references from
And
Scripture.
References from Scripture, and so if you admitted that, if you believe that, then angels don't change, and so when we behold something and we appreciate it and all this stuff, that's a very direct thing. It's just you behold, boom. Whereas in logic, something's got to follow through several steps, right? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That doesn't happen in beauty. Beauty, you just directly behold, and this is why it's so hard to say why it's beautiful. Because there's no steps.
Now hold on. Then is there any, if there's no steps and this is just something that just grabs us, is there any role in forming children's appetites on what they perceive as beautiful?
Yeah, giving them beautiful things all the time.
Okay, but if you give them things that aren't beautiful,
then that's bad for their soul.
Are they just not able to then later perceive beauty?
Making it harder for them to appreciate beauty because they become content with ugliness in some form.
That's true in literature. You know, if we expose them to good literature,
absolutely.
And we know that even as adults, when you read something that's fluff and then you read something that's beautifully written, you can tell the difference. But if you just read fluff all the time, it's very hard to read something beautiful because your brain is just not.
If they grow up on candy and all this stuff as a child, they're going to have a hard time. You're ruining their sense of taste. They're going to have a hard time appreciating something that like a fine meal because they associate pleasure with all those cheap imitations.
Sure, I agree with that, but I'm trying to make that jive with your point that in some ways beholding beauty is this sort of like angelic, non-rational operation, if you will.
If so, then what are we worried about with children, right?
Right.
Because they're just going to be able to
They'll
look
be
at.
drawn to it,
Mhm.
but you know
well,
that they're
no, I mean,
not.
so what you have to do with it, it's like wine tasting, right? I mean, there are people who can tell you, Jay Weil, who teaches at memoriacollege.org, Jay can tell you certain things about wine and how he can tell that where it came from, what grape it was used to produce it, all this stuff. But there are just factors about wine tasting that you can't totally, they're not, I don't want to say they're not objective. It's just they're hard to identify, right? You can, I'm trying to think of another example than wine tasting.
Yeah, because I'm not getting
Because
that.
when you argue about whether something is beautiful, isn't it hard?
Yes.
I mean, there's a movie you
It
like, or
is.
there's a book you like, or whatever.
And I feel like Paul and I don't agree at all on what's
But
beautiful.
I think
Yeah, our music at the bonfire on Friday.
But does that mean that there's no objective beauty if people disagree about it? And I think that's actually not the case. I think that and you find it true on a lot of things. Maybe food. Somebody is just they've eaten at McDonald's all their life, so they think a Big Mac is really good. But they don't appreciate
like
a
a
good
Big
steak.
Mac.
Or they, but I mean.
But you're right. They will get to a point where maybe they're eating chicken nuggets and they don't appreciate a good steak, or they don't
Well, and
appreciate
Yes,
fried chicken.
yes.
Right, which
Right.
brings us to the point that we do have to teach students to be discerning.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do have to put beauty in front of them.
All the
And we
time,
have to
yes.
put, I mean, I don't like that fantasy genre. And I've used this example many times that, it took me a long time to read Tolkien because I just didn't want to read about hobbits and,
Tanya, I was crying when I finished Return of the King the other day.
Well, yes, my husband cries every time too. But I do, when I did sit down to read it, I did recognize how brilliant it is, whether it's something I want to spend my time with or not. It's still beautiful, and that is objective.
Mhm.
He is a beautiful writer,
Mm-hmm.
and everything about it is beautiful. So I could say, well, like my son said in the 7th grade when he was reading Julius Caesar, that Shakespeare, how in the world is the man still being published? Because he was just, he wasn't a bit impressed. Well, thank goodness for adults who continued to feed Shakespeare to him so that he did eventually come to an understanding of that. But we can't leave this to children to discern what's beautiful. We have to train them, just as we have to be careful ourselves. I mean, we have to continue to be appreciative and to search for and recognize beauty and not take it for granted.
Yeah, and that's the problem, I think, with that question of is beauty objective is, so what are the criteria, right? And somebody mentioned here, I think you read out of Adler, unity, order, and clarity, which also, I've also heard the formulation integrity, proportion, and splendor. When you are teaching literature, for example, I think those are the things you're actually talking about in there. You're looking at the story, and you don't have to know those things to see its beauty, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you read it carefully and you're paying attention to things and all that, but you can to a certain extent explain why it's beautiful. You can talk about the way the plot works and how the author did something that was just really amazing in that plot, and how, you're talking about Dickens, how this character was drawn, and what an amazing thing it was that you created a person. This author created a person, and this person seems utterly real. And you can talk about other things in a story, but ultimately, that's all those things are just ways of coming at it from different angles so that you can see it better. And once you see it, if it really is beautiful, you will see the beauty in it.
And when we open students' minds up when we present all of these things with, I mean, even math. You know, Tom Sculthorpe talks about math like it's just beautiful. Just the whole concept.
The way you
of
say
it.
that is you don't think it is.
I struggle to see the beauty in math, but I'm sure, you know, it's for him the structure and the clarity and just, you know, he sees it as one of the greatest things of creation, I think.
Yeah. And ultimately, those things are really just different ways of beholding it,
right.
of getting closer to it so that you can see what it really is.
But then hopefully our students one day will go on to actually, you know, think about beauty and think about what's beautiful in their lives and search it out and not take it for granted, not take this.
Well, and also the importance of it. I was in our reorganizing things in our living room, and I just got a new painting.
You've moved from your office to the living room.
Well, no,
now.
I'm in my office. I finished there.
That's what I mean.
And I put a new painting up above the fireplace, and the shelves. They've got this white shelves, you know, and around the fireplace, and so I just decluttered. I put things, and it's interesting. Where you place something makes all the difference in the world.
Does.
And sometimes you can't. And there are actually rules. Design people will tell you there are rules for this. There's
Balance.
the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
There's down to the Fibonacci sequence. I mean, there's all these natural, objective rules for this. And if you knew them, it would be it would have taken, if I knew that, it would have taken me a lot less time to organize these shelves and everything. But you get it to a point that looks right. Whereas putting it in a different position is not right. And sometimes you can't say what it is, right? That doesn't mean it's subjective, though.
I can't say what it is, but I get it.
Yeah.
People that are really gifted with being able to decorate a room, it is a skill.
Well, I was recently in California visiting my stepmother. My father passed away a number of years ago, and my father was an engineer, but he was also we were going through the house that he designed the house. And it wasn't just his engineering ability that allowed him to do all these amazing things in there. Any angle you took on it to look at it, it was beautiful. And he had designed it that way. He not only had this engineering sense of how something should be rightly built, it was how to make it beautiful. And I didn't realize this about my dad till just recently, that he had this aesthetic sense. It, not only in the architecture of the house, but when I went through his clothes, my stepmother said, he knew how to dress. He knew what tie went with what jacket and all that stuff. And and I looked at it, I said, you're right. And I just never even thought of my dad in that way, but he had an aesthetic sense. He knew what was right with what. And could he have told the rules for why that tie went? You can't.
He could just
How can
see
you even utter that? You don't even know what that is. But you know when you see it. You know that color goes with that other color.
Yeah.
The color of the tie goes with that color.
So
and it is more beautiful than when they're not right.
Right. So what does this look like in a classroom? What does beauty look like in a classroom?
Because I could see a world where you could overemphasize it or underemphasize it.
Can you overemphasize beauty? In what way?
I think if you were focused so much on the atmosphere or the design of the room and didn't prep your content, I could see overemphasizing it that way.
I mean, classrooms aren't always beautiful. They've got Latin charts up. My dining room where we did our school, the dining room table, my dining room became really a kind of a hot mess. Like the china cabinet was full of books and binders and not pretty books, just daily work. But yeah, I don't know about at home.
Well,
at least you're in your home, right? And and there's some beauty there.
I think there's something peaceful about beauty. I mean, there's something good for the soul about beauty. So if you can make the place that you are beautiful, I do think that's important.
I do too.
Well, and what we've kind of mentioned is a key component of beauty is order, right?
Yes.
And
that's the first thing.
That's the first thing. And so It's
And
hard.
it is-
It's hard to keep it orderly.
It is hard, but it does mean something. It is nice to come into your schoolroom and know that everything is in its place before you start. Now, it becomes a huge mess during the course of the day, but then to get it all cleaned back up and ready for the next day, there is something to be said for that.
And to have your students help you with that is training them to be habituated to an order.
Yes, which worked for one of my children and not the other. But
well, and we talked about this with
success.
schools. We'll go into a classroom in a school, and it'll be one of the biggest problems is clutter. Everything's cluttered.
The things
There's too
we've
much
seen,
stuff,
right?
And it I think it really does. It's why I was reorganizing my living room. I was not at peace in that room. I needed it to be beautiful in that room. And one of the problems was the order.
And I think that's true. We've had schools visit here and see that our classrooms are uncluttered, very little on the walls. And then when we would go visit them, I'm thinking specifically of one where some 6th grade teachers came and visited, spent a couple of days with us. And then when we went back to their classrooms the next time, they had totally, like the whole school was still kind of a cluttered mess, but their classrooms were totally simple. And they said it made all the difference in the world. That they just had the few things up that they really needed to have, and that their students were sitting in rows, not in nests. And that that order that they brought to the classroom not only helped them, but helped their students, especially the students who were easily distracted, just to have that. And Tara always says, if wherever your focal point is, which should be the teacher, around that wall where the teacher stands all the time with the whiteboard, she said that should have very little on it, because that you want them to look at you, not at all the posters on either side of you or above you.
Well, and I think, many schools don't have control over what the exterior of their school is.
That's right.
But when you can, because, I read somewhere that libraries used to be built with these massive staircases, because why? You were going up to something.
Nice.
It was bringing you up. You were being edified by going up to the library. And so architecture does make a difference. And so if the exterior of what you're doing, like if you're going to build a new school building and you need to think about the exterior, because you need to think about calling it actually imposes on the human person an attitude based on the architecture, right? And when they drive up in the morning, am I doing something that is mundane, or am I doing something that ought to be beautiful?
Right. It's just hard because it's hard because a lot of schools are renting churches that are not beautiful. And so it's really hard, for years. I taught in an old women's Sunday school classroom that had ancient little ugly pictures in it. And there was nothing I could do about that. It was a shared space. So, you just have to do the best you can, but it's not ideal. But if you can build your own, absolutely beauty needs to be a part of it. Cheryl always said it's impossible to have a classical school in an ugly building, but then she did it. We did it out of necessity. And the same thing at home. Just to make it home is nice anyway. Because
it's your
you're
sanctuary.
Home. That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's already decorated and a beautiful spot. But then, when it becomes overrun, we tried a schoolroom, an actual schoolroom with little desks and all, but we didn't last long with them in individual desks. I needed them at the table with me. But I've seen some beautiful schoolrooms.
I remember doing my work at the dining room table when I was homeschooled.
It's just it just felt easier. It was by the kitchen, so
well, and Mom had one of those folding easels with whiteboards, so
yeah,
just pull it out next to the dining room table. But then when dinner came, right, everything got cleared off, so it kind of forced an order that
it
couldn't
does
just
force
sit
an
there.
order. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it sounds like even when we talk about bringing this to a child's education, there are some tangible things you can do and some intangible things in front of you to do.
Yes.
As you're habituating them, as Paul
That's
said.
right.
And
And
maybe-
I'm sorry. I
Well,
didn't mean to
yeah.
interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we have read our quote from Aquinas and from Kant was about beauty came from Adler's How to Think About the Great Ideas, which I brought this book up a couple weeks ago or maybe last week, and I got the title of it wrong, so I just wanted to fix that today. And I do think we sell this book. I still didn't check that, but I think the college sells it, right? Maybe not.
I'm not sure. I know I just found
if
it
we
at a
don't,
used bookstore and I
all
picked it up
it
too.
is.
So
I thought we
I
carried
feel
it.
like we carry it.
Yeah, I
but,
think we do.
It's just, so this little chapter was how to think about beauty, but it's how to think about all kinds of things. And so it's nice little short essays if you're just looking for something about, that's one topic. So I did want to clear that up, that I think last time we gave the wrong title of the book because I couldn't remember.
How to Think About the Great Ideas,
Yes.
Mortimer Adler.
That's right.
There we go. And one more time with our new email account, podcast@memoriapress.com, where we would love to hear your great ideas or what
or
you're
your
thinking
judgment
about.
of the chicken tie.
Bring it on.
Or if you'd like my address so you can send me a better tie. I'm not beneath that.
Oh, great.
Oh. Well, it has been a delight talking with you. I have a lot to think about when it comes to beauty. So I'm sure we'll continue this conversation offline.
And possibly with a better tie.
Oh, and thank you for joining us. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.